Tonight we're going to talk about all the selfish things that come of the selfish people that get exposed to selfish teachers like me. Now this is again, you could talk a whole course about what we're going to talk about tonight. And the way that I'm going to try to deal with it is to talk about it in terms of some of the stages along the way that one resolves guilt, i.e. the pseudo-relationship with the slave owners, and one of the ways that labor expresses itself in the different philosophical conceptions that one has of one's life and one's responsibility to other people. Best embodied in the question of what is your attitude toward the question, am I anybody's keeper? When this whole issue of the cure of emotional slavery begins, one of the first stages in the resolution of it that requires dealing with the issue of whether one is selfish has nothing to do with one choosing to not do one's slavery role, but really have to do with fatigue and weariness that are coming from the tensions of this double life, the beginning experiences of conflict, rage, and understanding that are in fact wearing you out, and the beginnings of the conscious awareness that the toll of the role makes on you. I mean, a slave who's really into it is unaware directly of how worn down they are, how down on reserves they are, and you often have the illusion of enthusiasm, vitality, tremendous energy and upness in a person who's really worn out to death. But what happens as consciousness begins to get into that is an awareness of the toll, and the way that it's experienced is as a fatigue, namely, I just can't do as much as I used to do. And the reason offered is not that I don't want to do it, it's that I'm tired. And that tiredness is the beginning of the revolution. Obviously there are others, but that's an important manifestation for many persons. Now, as I've said before, and it needs to be said again, the wise slave owners are going to go to work right at that place. Because once this thing starts, if it has any life at all, the slavery relationship will never be the same. Even if it doesn't come to a completion, the healing, which it does in few persons, if it gets anywhere down the line, it's not going to be the same. And I would say that the central wisdom of that is the following. A slave owner, by definition, is a person who's not making life. It's a parasitical, tyrannical person who feeds off of the life and feelings, adoration, pity, whatever it is, of other persons. It's not a life-making person. And life is a hassle even for people who have slaves. So that the commodity which slave owners want more than anything is enthusiasm from other persons. Enthusiastic love, enthusiastic participation in manipulations. I want you to really feel it when you tell me you love me or you're sorry, because I need that feeling to make my life worth it in spite of how bitter and resentful, how much I hate my life, and how much hassle there is in it. And the slavery which I'm looking to somehow compensate for it is only going to touch me if there's a lot of feeling in it. So that if the slave gets started at all in the resolution of this, one of the first things that's going to go is that enthusiasm, which means then that if allowed to begin, let alone develop, what the slave owner is going to have for the rest of his or her life in that role is someone going through the motions who doesn't feel it, and there isn't even the illusion of the emotions that they want in their fantasies to compensate for their hurt and bitterness. So for that reason, because enthusiasm is one of the first things to go, the battle must be fought right off. And also, as I've mentioned before, it's got to be fought right off, because it's then that the relationships which jeopardize the slavery are usually young and tenuous from self-doubt, lack of trust, simply newness. Hence, they're more vulnerable to being destroyed than if they're allowed to get some start. Which is why you will see powerful strategies of breaking relationships in smart slave owners, and that institutionalized as an attitude morally in terms of social change and that kind of thing. I can remember dealing with parental outrage in the 60s when I used to teach classes for parents to help them understand what students were trying to say to them and how they were trying to live, that simply the discussion of why students were interested in smoking dope, what was in it for them, what was their experience, and that in light of what they saw their parents doing in terms of escape and boozing it up and all of that, simply discussing it rationally provoked outrage, and the reason given for the outrage is that to even acknowledge their feelings about this is the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of loss of control. It's the beginning of changes in habits and attitudes. And so that's dangerous, and I was an evil person for doing that, for even dealing with it. And there's an expression of what I'm trying to say, which is attack it at the beginning, because that's where the danger is. Once people start to think, you're going to have difficulty controlling that process, and your control and authority will never be the same, even if it doesn't progress far. There's a chip in it, and that first chip is very important. Don't date outside the faith, outside our background, outside your social class. But I only talk to her. Yes, that's where it starts. It's that kind of thing. Don't get involved with psychology. Don't think too much. Don't get around those people. You know, on and on. a paranoia justifiable for people who are interested in control. So that one may have to deal right off just as tired with the accusation that one is being selfish, that one is violating principles, rules, traditions, and how can you do that? And there's a crunch that if you can't live through, you're going to have a lot of difficulty with. I'm sure that that's why there is a cultural intolerance in those people who live off of strong people, that there's a cultural intolerance for strong people being tired. And that's a hard thing to understand. Why? It's in Henry Miller's little story, Smile at the Foot of the Ladder, about August, where the audience is intolerant and is provoked into its rage when he sits down and doesn't do it for them again. It's like we can't be sympathetic at that point because fatigue is the beginning of it. If you ease up the pressure, if you acknowledge that, you're giving a space within which dangerous things happen. And it is that very intolerance of fatigue or tiredness. I don't care what you feel, I'm tired too. Can't you just do that for your mother? You don't have to talk when you come to dinner, just come. We won't stay late. Can't you just do that? There are other things that you do. Can't you stop doing some of the other things that you do that are making you tired, but don't stop doing the things that I want you to do and that you do for me? But I won't be sympathetic with your tiredness. You do something about it. It's not an adequate reason to alter the role of the slavery. And it is that very thing that can begin, if we understand it, can begin breaking down our illusion that those people who are using us in those ways care about us. Because in truth, they don't give a fuck if we're tired and worn down. And what does that mean? When often a person who may be a complete stranger to you, i.e. a therapist or your new friend, who spent a total of 4.5 hours with you, feels your fatigue, comments about it, and says the next time they see you, I really hope you feel better. I was really concerned about you. And you're not hearing it from the people who've known you for 40 fucking years. They don't see it. They're not talking about it. They're not talking about easing up on it. And somebody who you hardly know is concerned, so what the hell is going on? So it can be what either side of that one, or both, which is most often what it is. I'm selfish, but something's wrong here. Now, the problem with fatigue is that it doesn't go away. And this is a wisdom that I learned from my wife about change that takes place in these kinds of circumstances. Because as you relate more and more to your value and to someone that values you, what begins to happen, even though you're still living a double life, is that you start to let down. It ain't a lot at the start, but it's a little bit. You let down. So you're still doing the slavery number, living this private life thing. You're tired, but the tiredness is getting worse even if you're doing less of the slavery or doing the same amount of it, but not bringing the same poop and enthusiasm to it. But you're getting more tired because you're getting aware of what you do. Your body armor, namely the compulsive machine that you've made of your body to live out the role, is beginning to come out of its numbness and deadness and feel, there are tensions in it, angers in it, anxieties in it, so that it's more fatigued than ever. Also, if you've been living down on third and fourth levels of reserve or deep breaths into other levels of functioning, you start bubbling up to saner, more natural levels of functioning, so that in fact you do less. You're not the same old work machine. So you get tired sooner, faster, with less put out within the role. So that rather than the tiredness going away, it stretches into months and sometimes years, which is a new phase and involves a reevaluation of your guilt. You're tired all the time, aren't you? Have you been to the doctor? Maybe you should get a checkup. Why don't you, this has been going on for a while. The slave owner parent that buys you mega vitamins or whatever the fuck, that is going to beef you up. There's a new problem. You need to eat better, whatever the hell it is. Because this is more than a phase. It's becoming the way you are, that you don't feel like doing it because you're too tired, or when you do it, it doesn't feel like it used to do. And as a matter of fact, I resent that. I mean, I would be ready to give you a vacation, but this is becoming a state of mind, and something is wrong here, and I've got my needs. And I did look the other way last Thanksgiving, or last week, or whatever it was, but it's a year now, or it's the same thing again. And how long is this going to go on that you're this way? Are you doing too much? Maybe you need to stop going to those classes or that shrink or whatever it is that you're, trying to do. Enough already with it. That's enough. It's enough thinking about yourself. You have to get back to your life. You're not your old self anymore. So maybe you really ought to think about what this is about. As a matter of fact, I have a few juicy stories for you. Tell you what happened to people like this. Like, I know somebody who was in psychoanalysis for 10 years and still killed herself. Or, it's like all kinds of stories to tell you that this is not going right. You shouldn't still feel bad or feel tired if you're whatever this is. So what you've got to deal with on your side is not only that question, but I can't tell myself anymore that there's going to be an end to this tiredness, and I'm going to go back to it because I've been saying this for a while. In fact, my feeling has changed, and I have to deal with that. Is that selfish, that I can't do it in the ways that I used to, or that I drag myself through the shopping, or in getting over there, or I don't do what I used to do, or there are silences at the dinner, or whatever it is. I don't make my father feel the same way I used to make him feel. I don't fake my orgasms as well anymore. I know that he almost guessed it the last time, or whatever it is. And is that right? And I can't really say to myself now anymore that it's going to change, because if anything, I'm just getting more tired. Also, what gets added into this is the bouts with physical symptoms and illness which punctuate this kind of a stage, where at times we are really sick. And instead of being able to acknowledge that we're sick of those people and sick of the roles, we have to see it as something is wrong with us. But obviously, if you're sick enough, that's reason enough to yourself that you can't do what it is that you have to do unless that illness goes on and on and on and on. Now, meanwhile, of course, on the positive side of it, a lover or a therapist or your own beginning consciousness is telling you that these people aren't really dying, even if they say they are, from your not doing what you used to do enthusiastically. So again, these things that are going on, that everybody knows are going on, but at least the smart slave owners are not recognizing and pressuring, the experience of it itself adds to the undermining of the role, because you're noticing things, your eyes are open while all of this is going on. Now, somewhere along in here, and these steps are not all discrete and universal and they get mixed up and whatnot, one begins to build the first bridge between these two worlds of slavery, which you're dragging yourself through tired and doing less than you used to do, and the secret world of love and consciousness. The first bridge is something like, I need to start building an identity, which is the statement to the slave owner, which means I'm not just telling you anymore that I'm tired, but I'm going to start telling you that there is a part of my life which is for me and the rest is yours. But I get something for me, and I need to do that for myself because maybe we're even going to rationalize this. That way I can do a better job for you. When I give you a good hand job on your soul and hurt feelings, it'll be better than ever because of all I'm going to bring to it. It's going to renew me or whatever. But even if it isn't that bad, it's going to be rationalized on the grounds that everybody gets to be an individual or build a sense of self, or without self-confidence, we're not real people. After all, what parents or no matter how harsh a slave owner publicly can say no to that, that you don't get to have some kind of a life of your own, which is somehow tied up with this therapy, other woman, other person, other set of friends, other world thing. And that involves a whole round of dealing with the issue of selfishness. Is it selfish to have any time for yourself, or in any part of a life to do something for you that's good for you, which is where you still are at this point? You can't do it because you want to do it. You're doing it because it's good for you, because the psychology books say so, because your shrink implies it or says it, because it makes you feel good, because it radiates out into other things, and in the work that you do value or the things that you like to do, you find yourself able to do it better, so there's a payoff for it. There are fruits for it, and that's why you do it, and that's the rationalization for it, and you ain't no farther than that, and even that's a problem in terms of guilt. Do you have a right to do something you want to do, even if it's good for you? Now, a lot of folks never get that far or die at that one. And what it's about is, how do you weigh something that's good for you against the hurt feeling of another person? And that's how the whole issue is framed in your mind, and that's how they're very happy to frame it. Go ahead and go to your class. Sure, I'll feel hurt, but if it makes you feel better, fine. How do you deal with that one? And all of its gross to sophisticated versions. Sophisticated versions. How do you hurt another person's feelings to build your identity? So that's a whole round of dealing with. Yeah, I can hear right now people saying, well, anyway, I know, tell me an answer to that one. Like, I don't, hurt and something that's good for me. I can't see that one. And you're not going to get any help for that from the slave owners. What you're going to get is some begrudging version of, I gave you fatigue and tiredness. All right, I'll make a further concession and let you have a time in your life, because everybody gets that, when you get to think about yourself, but you're on leave. That may not be said. It may not be that. They may say it. But it's like, you're on leave. You get to do that. You get to go to school, but I'm keeping your room. You're coming home. And that's understood. So you get a time. That's the understanding of it. And often that whole thing being couched in some kind of condescending, matronizing, patronizing, granting you that, which is incidentally what the women's liberation movement has screamed so wisely about, the whole idea of let and allow. I will let you do it. Well, fuck you for saying that. Let me, but that's what the slave owner is going to say. Implicitly, I will let you have a time for you to do the things, not that you want to do. That's not yet. That's down the road. That you're going to do that are good for you, that the doctor says you need, or whatever it is. Okay, so you're doing that one now. You're doing it for what it gives you, for the confidence it builds, so that I stopped smoking, I lost weight, all the things that you say to yourself that were symptoms of your old tension and nervousness, and it gets to be a problem during those times if there are no physical changes that you can muster as rationalizations as the fruit for what it is that you're doing. And incidentally, that has a lot to do with fat people, people who have experienced all kinds of social ostracisms for physical symptoms, the ones who really get it together, constantly rebelling against any notion of losing weight because the doctors say you're going to die if you don't, or you're not going to be healthy if you don't, etc. In other words, threats that I'm not going to lose weight until I accept my fat, love it, and choose to lose weight because that's what I choose to do and no other reason. Not because losing weight is a sign that I'm getting together. So that slave owners are going to use that kind of pressure. You ought to be improving your impression if you're doing this thing that you say you're doing. And often do people not only not lose weight during this time and not stop smoking, etc. They smoke more, they get fatter, they drink more, smoke more dope because they got more tensions than, and their body armor is going nuts, and they got to do more to keep from jumping out of their skins and keep the rage under control than they had to do before. So this again is going to offer evidence to the others and to one's guilt that, hey, I'm not, am I improving for all of this selfish time and money and investment of energy I'm doing, hurting the feelings of the slave owners I'm not taking care of as well as I used to be. That's the dilemma. You hold on to someone taking shit for it. Further development of identity, and what we start to see happening is a very crucial chapter in the change in emotional slavery, and that is that now I'm not only doing less over there, but I really don't feel the role anymore. Still doing it, but I don't feel it. And what I really feel is this new life. It may still feel miserable, terrible, but I appreciate what the value, I see where it's going, things are happening over there, but I'm still doing this other thing. It's not that I'm not enthusiastic. It's a lot worse than that. It's only going through the motions. Only my body is there. Those are all the things that the slave would say. You're here, but you're not here. You're saying the words, the same old feeling. Don't you love your mother anymore? Etc., etc. Don't you love your poor old dad? It's not, you haven't told me you love, there's something wrong here. And at this place is society's great buttress. And most people never get beyond this one and the resolution of it, and that what it is it's my mother, it's my father, it is my husband or my wife, it is the person I said I'd marry, it is my child, it was my first love, my first friend, and that's the reason for doing it. It's blood, or however you want to put it. We're family. At that place is erected all of the institution, because few people have gotten further than that, hence broken that institution. At that place is built a whole idea about life, which is probably less typically Los Angeles than it is other parts of the country. Because in Los Angeles there's been so much instability, trippiness, and genuine attack on those institutions that this kind of attitude is probably less prevalent here than it would be other places in the country. But there it would be the idea that that's what life is really to live doing things without feeling, and feeling virtuous that one does that, and fighting to the death for that. It's involved in America, right or wrong. Even if you don't feel it, do it. It's your mother, it's your parents, it's the only mother you've got. All of that kind of idea, which has nothing to do with feeling and relationship. It's an idea. And it doesn't say you have to feel it when you do it, but it says you have to do it. You have to go through the motions of it. And if you don't, then you're really selfish. So over here you got now our emotional slave about halfway down the road and running up against that one. Feel good over here. And I'm not even asking myself anymore to get into it, put feeling into the cards, into the dinners, into the treats, into the declarations of love, into the love-making, into whatever it is that I do. Not asking that of myself, but I've got to do it. And especially on the holidays. I mean, those are big times for obligation. I can get it down even to bare bones, but I got to do it or I'm selfish. And is that asking too much of myself? If I get to do my identity almost all the time, and after all, you can't do you can't do it all the time because we're tired and we don't have the energy to do it. I mean, even Faber says, quoting Sartre, that you can't live an existential life all day, every day, or you die in 5 years from being worn out because of all the choices you'd make. If you can't do it all the time, what's hurting? If, when you're tired at night, after you've done what you wanted to do all day long, just call her. Just say hello. Just, you know. What's that? And if you don't do that, am I selfish if I don't do that? Even if I'm doing what I want to do almost all the time. Still not there. Now we got a person, living identity, going through the motions over here without feeling. Next step is a change in priorities, which is probably the first real integrated coming together of the two worlds, or the beginning of the acting out of the death of the slavery. And what that has to do is when I can accept that my concerns and what I want to do come first. Then there are other persons that are important to me, that are second, third, fourth, and fifth, and my mother or my father or my husband or wife or that friend or whatever it is comes seventh. No longer first without feeling, or co-first with me, seventh. Now, it doesn't have to be seventh. It can be whatever. I mean, sometimes it's just a big movement to get it down to two. But what I'm saying here is when I can accept that I would rather do that than be a son or a daughter or the slave. Now that is beginning to make choices with slavery under some control and a ballpark with love and feeling, and not coming off well. Not two people anymore. One person making choices based on priorities. You still got guilt. The guilt is the following. I'm not doing for you anymore because you don't really love me as much as I thought you did, and I don't love you as much as I thought I did. And I'm angry with you. I'm hurt by what you've done. I'm starting to think that you're never going to change, so it doesn't do any good to try to keep telling you what I'm feeling and why I'm hurt. And there are other people who treat me better. I treat myself better. So I'm still helping people and being good, but I'm being good to better people than you. In other words, where I get back something. But I still have to be a good person. I still got to be doing the stuff that I used to do for you, but to good folks who are mutual and loving and that kind of thing. But I might have trouble justifying my investment in those relationships if those folks weren't there, which is a related conflict to the one that Eric Berne described when he talked about the AA chapter where everybody went back on the bottle when there wasn't anybody to convert from alcoholism anymore. So in other words, if I can't do it for productive, conscious people, maybe I ought to do it for you. And I'm only not doing it for you because I've found better folks. Am I being selfish, giving to people who give back? Or is love Christian grace? Is it giving without strings attached? Is it giving for the sake of giving? Is that really what charity is? And is what all these fucking psychologists are calling love really selfishness? Just business deals where you give to get. That's really selfish. Real giving is when you don't think of it. And obviously the slave owners are telling you that that's what love is. That's what they give to you. You just don't know it. You don't know all they've been through and all they've done for you and all the secret tragedies and all of that, whatever. So you can't look to fairness and exchange and mutuality. There's a concept of love. Christians, Catholics, have a hell of a time with this. The whole notion of grace sets us up for it. Jesus doesn't love you because of your value. Jesus did what he did in spite of the shit that you are. You were terrible before you ever started, original sin, and only add to it. And even the best of you just have a shorter list of what's wrong. You're only less undeserving. And the worst of you are loathsome, but Jesus still loves you. That's the model of love. So what is a love that asks for fairness? That is open to the notion of return. What is a person, which is what consciousness and a life of truth is, a person who is looking for fruitful processes? That's a way of describing good relationships and decent work, namely to be involved in things that generate life and some kind of a response back to you. Is that love, or is that selfishness? The next step is a very difficult one. And what that really involves is finally seeing one's life as simply doing what you want to do. That in the final analysis, it's not that you are not loving the slave owner or doing it for them because of what they've done to you. You're not having to take into your dealing with your guilt and responsibility the lists of the offenses and violations and neglects that your therapist, lover, your own mind and consciousness have armed you with in order to say no. There's a step beyond that where you don't need all of that to hold. You simply do what you want to do. And if you feel something for someone, you do it. And if you don't feel something, you don't do it, and you don't think about it. Or, to put it into some words that were said to me today, whenever I have to think about anything, something's wrong. Whenever I have to think about belief, what I believe about the person, there's something wrong. And the only things I can trust are what I do from feeling, spontaneously. And there's a whole notion of selfishness erected at that place. Most persons are going to stumble at the concept of priority, which means the furthest I can get is to put you down at 7th or 49th. Practically speaking, which may mean I may never get around to calling you, writing you, doing what I used to do. I give lip service to it and it doesn't happen. But I still tell myself and tell you, it's there. How do you get beyond that to feel that you don't have to have a list of priorities in a conscious sense, that you don't have to defend your decisions to yourself even if you're making the right decisions, that you simply get to feel? Namely, you go beyond psychology and you go beyond the reason for this. You transcend consciousness to finally live a spontaneous life. Very difficult. We have a whole notion, partly fanned by psychoanalysis and partly with good reason, buttressed by the apocalypse of the Second World War and the terrible violations of the Nazis, that if we really do what we feel, that the id is an amoral, in many people, mean, selfish thing, and that what comes out of people, if they do what they do without any humanitarian concern, i.e. without thinking about mothers, fathers, country, the other person, hurt feelings, anything, they do what it is, nice things don't happen. In other words, we are not well equipped to believe in the intrinsic value of people's feelings. Now, there's something that one encounters at that place, which is a real testing place and a healing place. Namely, that it's around at this time in the evolution of a person that people who have meanness in them but have been emotional slaves, unable to express it, kissing other people's asses and doing for them, rubbing their spirits, find themselves getting in contact with parts of them that are not humanitarian and loving and may be hurting. Some may have even in them a sadism that comes from their childhood experience, may be a part of their nature, and it may be a reaction to all the violation that's been done to them. Some people pass through this healing without ever wanting an eye for an eye in a cruel sense, and some do. And that is a part of the healing, and that is a place that you come to. Now, I can tell you that not only different people who deal with healing and therapy have different attitudes about that aspect of human nature and deal with it differently. It's the same thing in love. It's the same thing in any relationship. What can we accept of the other person's karma? What ultimately can we accept the other person if they are fully themselves? And I can tell you that in the therapy and loving of almost every emotional slave I've known, resolving it, there comes a time when the possibility of meanness, violence, and cruelty must be passed through whether it happens or not. The possibility is there. And the way that a slave would put it into words on this side of it is, I'm selfish if in taking the next step I do cruel or mean things. The thing that justifies what I've done, saying no to this, is that somehow it's a good person. And if I'm a person that isn't all good, parts of me that I don't like, or parts, is that right, fair? And that's why I stop at that place and would say for the rest of their lives, I can't really do what I feel, because if I did, I'm afraid I'd really hurt somebody, or I'm afraid I'd murder somebody. I almost did once, and I'm afraid to just be myself again, or I may do that. And I can't accept that possibility, so I stop at that place. And the same thing has to be true in therapy. And there is erected at that place, there's a whole legal thing going on now. Should psychologists, for example, are we ethically responsible to warn people of the violent feelings of the people that you talk to, which is a contradiction in terms if you are going to deal with people who've been violated. And the way the Supreme Court has the state Supreme Court has it set up right now, the psychologist who doesn't warn is legally in jeopardy. In other words, people can't feel their homicidal, violent feelings and either pass through those feelings to get to the other side of them, or in the expression of them have some of the energy of those emptied, or if that is the karma and the violations have been that bad, they act out the feelings to some degree. And is that the rightful fate? Or is that selfish? That's an ethical issue that every person has to deal with. Is it selfish for instinct to have its day? Or should one control certain instincts and stop the evolution of an eye for an eye, the rightful punishment of certain violations to human dignity, if that's what one feels? What do you feel about crimes of passion with good reasons? What do you feel about the woman who shotguns down the rapist? What do you feel about that? Is that the karma? Or is it human and civilized and much more righteously? Is it the moral thing to carry that? And I'm not saying in this a dignifying of violence. What I'm saying is that for every person who acts out those crimes, there are probably thousands of persons who die from repression and self-hatred and a violation of their freedom for fear of passing through their right to feel certain emotions, and sometimes with damn good reasons, and sometimes if you listen to the stories of what people have been through, you wonder why they don't feel even more than they feel when they're free to feel. So at that place, there is a major struggle with the issue of selfishness. When, if I do what I do, I don't know what I'll do. And that's no problem when it comes to love and being outrageous and breaking social customs and dancing on the streets and singing love songs in elevators. And I mean, that's a problem too. I mean, people thinking you're nuts, and you've really gone crazy. But it's a real problem when it comes to the issue of violence, what one feels about that. Okay, let's take about 10 minutes and then we'll talk some more about it. Forgot to talk about one thing that I want to say. I've said this in other courses, but it's a wisdom that is very important in what we talked about tonight, so it needs to be said again. Hurts that are not at the deepest levels, at the level of dignity, are healed by catharsis, are healed by not being added to, don't have an autonomous life of their own like injuries to dignity do. So that there are special characteristics to the healing of injuries like we're talking about in emotional slavery, where people have been violated. And one of the things that goes with that is that if you not only wed to injury, the idea that if you wed to that injury, as well as the idea that one has tied in a function in relation to other people to that injury, namely that what you do in the role of the slave is itself a violation, then in the logic, instinctual logic of healing as a pendulum swing, it may become a part of that healing, if the healing is really to take place, that not only will you stop doing what you used to do for the slave owners, even if it's something that you like to do, if it's your nature, you're well suited to it and you love it, like helping, loving, giving. But you may have to not do that function for a long time, for the function to heal. Two expressions of that. One, an example that I have always liked, the sculptor Bob Bassler describing how in order to break his hands that were trained of classical sculpture, that whenever he touched the clay, he touched them in certain compulsive ways. For 1 year, he only touched the clay with an object in his hands, like a piece of wood. In other words, he did not let his fingers touch the clay, because they were compulsively classical. The other thing that occurs to me is what used to be said in Venice in the 60s was a wisdom. It was used by some persons, but it was a wisdom, namely that the work freaks, the compulsive Protestant work freaks, which most of us are, could really only ferret out the depths of their work compulsions if they stopped working for a long time in any way that they'd understood work. Because it would only then be that you'd find out all the little things that are a part of it, that you get in touch with all the nervousness about your self-value if you don't do what it is that you're supposed to do. And if you don't, in the sense that we're talking about tonight, only then would you heal the violation, if work had been a violation of you, and which it has been for many people. what they do in their work involves humiliation, embarrassment, shaming of them, a renunciation of their values, whatever. So that what I'm saying here is that, and this is a real problem now for one's notion of selfishness. If I'm a loving person and I can make people happy by what I do, I'm empathetic, I can do that, how can I justify to myself doing time what I like to do but can't do because it hurts me to, not giving myself 6 months, which is cheating on the healing. Like, I'm going to take a 6-month, that gets at it, but it violates it. Means is not do it for a while until I feel like I can do it again and not hurt myself, and do it only because I want to do it, and not have to know that I'll ever do it again. In other words, I've got to accept the idea, if I'm really going to play it straight now and not hide from the left hand to right hand, which frustrates the healing, I'm going to really stop it for a while. If that's, now I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm saying that's what some people come to and what the healing requires. The healing requires, and that I may never go back to whatever this thing is again. And if I do, I do, and if I do, I don't, and I accept that I may not. And I'm not doing it knowing that I will go back to it. And then that place that's been violated may heal. One place where that happens like crazy is with empathy. Many emotional slaves have so violated their empathy. I mean, they're just feeling machines for other people. I mean, as we talked about right at the beginning of the course, they don't even feel their own feelings. They feel what the other person feels directly. They don't feel it as I'm feeling my feelings, and my feelings are influenced by you. It's that I've become you. It's at the level of identification. I am you, and I know you're feeling maybe even more than you do. I feel your hurt worse than you feel it. Sometimes, for example, slave owners are really very superficial, hysterical people who feel all emotions in a very fleeting, showy, dramatic way, but don't feel it deeply. And their kids, who are their slaves, are dying from existential levels of hurt that are involved in these distorted identifications with the hurt of an, in fact, very superficial person. Now, if your empathy as a function has been violated in that kind of way, at some place in the healing, you may really have to withdraw your empathy for a long time for it to heal, and for you to be able to come back to it and have it be something that you can use without it hurting yourself, and without it, and with its perceptiveness being natural and not exaggerated. And if you have to justify this growth thing, how do you, as a reason for breaking the slavery, how do you see that as what you get, and it not being selfish, especially if you want to do it, but you can't do it because it hurts you. It's a difficult a very difficult thing to accept. Gets into very practical things. How can I ask, for example, how can I ask a therapist who's helped me to take a reduced fee or postpone the payment of the fee because I can't work anymore in the way that I have? I'm going to go live on my savings, or I'm going to borrow money from somebody, or I'm going to do something, or I'm going to live on subsistence. I've known people who have lived in cars for months, not had a house, and that I can't work anymore because work is a violation. And how can I accept that? And how can I not pay my way in my selfish search for myself? How can I accept that and not feel selfish? I mean, not only not do what I used to do, but ask other persons to postpone their needs or gratifications while I do nothing, because that's what I have to do to heal myself, or just because I feel like doing nothing. That's me. There was a question at the break about tranquilizers. Sure. I mean, I've said that before. Passing through what we're talking about here is very stressful, and you gotta take care of yourself in the ways that you can take care of yourself to live through the stress. And whether it's Valium or booze or whatever it is, if you gotta do it, you gotta do it. I would like to say that and this gets into something that, in order to say it, I have to say that I'm not a person who is or has ever been involved with grass or psychedelics, not because I'm righteous about it, but because I'm scared about it and I don't have a taste. It's not my taste. I like wine and good brandy. But so I would say, acknowledging that personal bias, that I find that people, not everyone now, but that many persons that I've known who use grass or high-powered uppers or downers or psychedelics as a part of this experience, not everyone now, but many who use it a lot, who rely on it as what they use to get through it, that some of those drugs have the effect of putting one in another place than the healing process that's going on. And sometimes that place is disconnected enough and spaced enough from the experience that I feel it introduces a confusion or a vagueness which doesn't help. In other words, it does more than Valium or booze seem to do, although booze can do that with some people, in that it takes you to another place, and when you come back, you are at the place you were before you took whatever it was, and maybe even a little confused, so that the experience, the experience is more than moderated, it can get spaced out a bit. Now that's coming from somebody who's not a doper, and I want to acknowledge that, but I've seen that. Now, I don't really think I'm some uptight closet 50s asshole in that. It's an experience that many depth therapists, people who do deep work, feel even more strongly about than I do. I'm not a person who sets down rules. I know therapists who won't work with people who smoke a lot of grass. I don't feel that way at all, and it's like none of my fucking business. But I can say that if that gets to be a strong thing, I think it can slow down this process and smudge it. Some of the clarity of it is lost. Now that's not saying don't smoke grass, and it's not saying you can't get well if you do or any of that. But it's saying that if you're asking about how is this healing process affected by the different ways that you deal with the tensions of living and the tensions produced by the healing, I think that different agents have different effects, and it's only a given person's business what their choices are and what their taste is in relation to that. But I think there are different effects, and those effects have consequences in your experience. So that's what I'd say about tranquilizers. Now, I know people who, many of the people that I've known who, it's like well, let me say, I know people, it ranges all the way from people that take 50 milligrams, I guess, would it be, of Valium daily for years. I mean, it's like gigantic. Yeah, it's like I take 2 and I sleep 12 hours, you know. It's like, I mean, who live on like 50 a day for years. And I've known people who simply have the prescription in their pocket and never use it, or have the bottle, but you know, take 1 a year, but I know I've got the bottle there in case I want to kill somebody, I can reach for Valium or something. You know, in other words, it's really a psychological trip that it's there. But what I would say is whatever you need to do, and that includes eating or whatever people have to do, is whatever they have to do. And the thing to do is to be aware of how something affects you and want that, you know, dig it. That's what there is. That's what I'd say about tranquilizers. Okay, questions or reactions? Yeah?
You said that any experience under drugs is not internalized by that person.
Well, what I was trying to say is, my experience is that there is a meaningful idea to me, feeling-wise, now not theoretically, but a meaningful idea that has to do with integration of experience. Namely, that when you have an experience, that you can add it in to your ongoing experience of life. And that's got many dimensions to it. It's there as a feeling, as a memory. It is there as a meaning. You have a philosophical relationship to it. It's you fit it into your frame of reference on a day-by-day basis. And I would say, and this is a point of view about functioning, that my sort of axiom of psychological functioning is how do you get to a place in life where when you're walking down the street, you know that if anything happens, you can deal with it? That's that's what I would call psychological health. That it is not involved in there are certain things that can't happen, or what would I do if I don't have him or her, or what would I do without, or I'll solve it by doing this, or whatever. But I know, as a conscious person walking around, I can deal with anything. I may have a hell of a time, but I can deal with it. Now, at that level of, and I'm assuming that's some non-drug, non-booze state, what seems to build that are experiences that take place in relation to that state. And when you have experiences that take place in extra, I don't know how you'd put it, states, they're taking place in another frame of reference. I'm stoned now, or I think I'm stoned, or however it is. I mean, because there's a big, what's the word, placebo effect in relation, suggestibility effect that you see in stuttering, and that where stutterers will stop stuttering if you give them another identity. If you don't have to claim cold turkey what you're being, there are a lot of things that you can be and do if you're not in that state. Now, I'm not saying that drug experiences don't integrate, but I'm saying that most of them don't integrate one for one. Now, there are exceptions to that. I've known people who accumulate vast sort of stores of rage and internal experience, and who don't have relationships that can provide an acting out of that. And those kind of people can drop acid or something like that in some kind of responsible sort of way, and it's like a gigantic X-lax for them. I mean, they just have a psychic blowout, and they sort of get caught up to themselves. Now, I must say that those people do a whole lot of thinking after they're down about that experience and translating what they got into that. I'm not talking about somebody who's taking acid every day for a month. I'm talking about somebody who takes it once every 6 months, or I'm not trying to say I'm just saying what I've seen. And those people seem to take what's in that experience and pull fragments and alter that, integrate it with that sense of self, if you want to put it that way. So I'm really talking in relative terms. Now, my experience of chronic grass smokers in relation to this sense of self is that they're vague. I mean, that's what I'd say about them. They feel, they have ideas, but the power dimension is often lost. Power and clarity in that quality. They're and clarity in that quality. They're vague. And they sometimes may be in touch and feel a lot and have a lot of empathy and emotion and all of that, but it's smudged out. Now, I'm not pitching for compulsive consciousness. I mean, however anybody wants to live. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to live on different planes, and they dig it. Like, I'll cope down there, and then I'm going to be in that space with grass or whatever it is, and once in a while I'm going to do this trip, and I'll do this over here, and far out. Whatever you want, fine. I'm saying that if you're going to be involved in trying to resolve very difficult conflicts, which involve the mobilization of enormous amounts of emotion to budge them at all, you may have some difficulty really resolving those conflicts in a non-drugged place. I mean, you may resolve them, go way past them when you're loaded, or away from it, or understand tremendously about them. But you may not be able to resolve them as quickly or at all in a non-drugged place, dealing with them head on. So what we get into here is the whole notion of frustration. How do you deal with frustration? There are a lot of depth therapists who really believe that the whole thing about the whole drug thing and the whole grass thing has really washed out a whole generation of persons in terms of a clarity or power of consciousness. And it has something to do with why things are so trippy and hysterical today. I would say that that's a bit of a harsh judgment, but there's a lot of truth in that. Now, that is a bias in terms of what kind of life do you want to live. If you want a life of people who are capable of application to tasks that involve months or years of persistent, stubborn, dogged involvement at high levels of consistent energy, evolutions of high levels of talent or healing or very difficult things, then I think you have to be a person with a tremendous amount of psychic power and able to direct it. If you're not asking for that from your experience, if what you're asking from it is a more experiential and impulsively creative life, like once in a while it's all right to hit on something, then you don't need that quality of character. And I'm not saying that grass smokers can't develop frustration tolerance. I'm saying those are some things I've seen. Yeah. And again, it's like whatever your trip is, I can tell you that those folks wind up having a lot of troubles, because what you wind up doing is borrowing, getting access, without that access being a function of your personal feeling of security, again, on a day-by-day basis, and that access being a function of how vulnerable you feel that you can be cold turkey, without being in some extraordinary state, like worn out or boozed up or in that space. So you're getting access that you can't catch up with in terms of other parts of yourself, or you're not working out your fear or your self-consciousness at the same time that you're in that space. You're getting around it. Now, what I would say is that you wind up paying the piper later, unless, now I'll tell you another interesting thing related to that. If everybody you work with is in the same space, and most of the audience is loaded, there's a whole thing that's going to happen there too. But then what you're back to is, which is the whole problem of the 60s. Why could I get loaded with you last night, and today you came back and swiped my stereo? What did that mean? What's that? What is our relationship with each other if we can get and yet we're not. I mean, what is that? And there's the same thing in bars with people that are boozed up, and you know, you hit the edge of it, and there's a fight or whatever. And what I would say about it is, what I see happening is artists. This is what my impression of it. Artists, once they get into that, have to play it out. They get more into it. In other words, to get to the emotion, you got to keep doing it. And there's an end place. I would call it a rape. I would say it's psychologically raping yourself. And at a certain place, you're going to dry up. You're not going to be able to get it out of yourself. So that sets up a whole fear number. Like, what if I burn out, or then I'm going to have to escalate. I have to move from grass into coke, and you know, then what? You know, it's that kind of a trip. And then after all that's done, I've got to come back to myself. And there are a lot of ex-dopers around who used to smoke a lot of grass and now smoke once in a while or something like that. And their life is kind of not coming back to before what it was, but in some kind of a way of, I can't do that. I can't push that. And also, if you get creatively way out ahead of what you have worked out in other areas, you wind up getting into other problems. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why artists are having all of these incredible problems with being manipulated by the power brokers and all of that in music and whatnot, is that they're able to get into a place, but they may not be able to do business, deal with fairness, and say no to somebody, and say no to the parasites, so that you got 40 groupies, but you can get it on, except that the groupies are wearing you out and destroying your body. So in other words, if you're not working your life out as you go, you're going to pay for it. Every time you do a creative thing, you build up an expectation in yourself and other people that you can do it again. And if you can only do it loaded, there's a fear thing that gets into that. You know, like, where would I be without it? Or, you know, what's really going on? That's what I mean. Somehow, to me, what freedom is not being able to get in that space. What freedom is knowing I can deal with whatever. And I would say that in general, creativity works best when you don't work much more than a half step beyond that space. And if you get big pseudopods shooting out from your little squishy amoeba that's walking down Westwood Boulevard that are shot out 3 years ahead of you, it's going to make for problems, maybe. From the people that I know, and obviously I don't know a lot of people, but from the people that I know in the entertainment industries now, an awful lot of the big people are in real trouble. And drugs are a part of that. Now, people have always been in trouble, and the big people have always been unhappy. Okay, now to review a bit the dilemma that we started with. It will provide a setting for understanding the resolution of emotional slavery in the problem of rage and revenge. The slave owner is then an embittered person a person whose life is essentially hurt. Namely, it's beyond the accumulation of hurts. It is a life defined by hurt, which then creates the logic of abuse, so that you have a right to ask for unfairness. You have a right to make unfair demands on another person because of the way that you see your life, or you can justify sadism to yourself and inhumanity developed out of the concept that you have of your own experience. And this kind of an attitude toward life tends to be more than a facet of life. Rather, it often represents a person's life in the totality of that. Namely, emotional slavery and enslavement of other people is not one of the things that kind of person is, as well as being a person in other ways, finding experiences in different modes. But most slave owners tend to be that as a life, which means that these attitudes and relationships have enormous force behind them. It's not just a set of feelings and a reaction to it, but the whole life thrust is expressed in the slavery relationship and the slavery attitude and the feelings and rights and obligations that go with it. And in addition to this, many slave owners are people who have long ago passed the place where they feel that their life is worth it, and they would choose to die were it not for the slave or the possibility of slavery and its gratifications and compensations to them. So that the slave often finds himself or herself the reason for someone's living. And when you have people carrying that kind of and degree of unhappiness, whether it's true or not, if they conceptualize their life that way, that adds to the power and the kind of poisonous passion of the slave owner's attitude. So that's what you're up against. With your ever more powerfully experienced ambivalence between trying at some subsistence level to meet or walk through or role play the meeting of that tremendous force of demand, expectation, and obligation violation, and trying to live your own life, and the conditions of those two being in radical opposition within yourself, so that the emancipating slave is at war within himself or herself over this ambivalence. And the experience of it tends to be that it escalates with force, and the banging the head against a stone wall character doesn't tend to alter very much. And that sets the atmosphere for what we talked about when we talked a bit about desperation and touched on last week. sets the stage for the kind of last drama in this battle with the slave owner. And what that has to do with is our attempt to somehow symbolically alter this fundamental drama and dilemma that we find ourselves in, to find some way to be ourselves and continue the slavery, or much more dramatically, some way to make the slave owner perceive what's been happening, with the hope that in that moment of recognition, if we can get that person to see what's been going on and to feel any note of sorrow or appreciation for us or awareness of us as persons, if they've never had that, that in that moment somehow we'll find all the thousands of hurts we've been through worth it. Keep in mind again the energies that are accumulating from these hurts. And with any person, for example, a parent that's enslaved us, there are thousands of experiences of neglect and violation, or the possibility of them, all of them unworked out. And what you are faced with at the end of this drama, in accepting that your life has been this, that it continues to be that, and if you are open to it, it will only go on this way, and that that person can never change, and even if they could, the time was past years ago when you would ever be genuinely open to them. With that kind of violation going on, what it means is that accepting that means 20, 30, 40 years wasted, no value in it, and all there is to do is walk away beyond rage in sadness. And if that's what you're facing, that you've had thousands of experiences that are existentially meaningless, that have no reason for them, no purpose, there's no value in them. You may learn from them, but that isn't because they're intrinsically valuable. It's simply that you learn from it because it was an experience. How do you face something like that in a marriage or with parents, or all that one has invested in a life, to walk away with nothing? And one of the ways that we can not face that is to pull the rabbit out of the hat, to somehow take all the energy that is in those violations and focus it in grand symbolic gestures of trying to break through to the slave owner, to make them aware, to make them feel, and hoping that somehow in those moments, if we can make a glimmer of recognition, that we will alter not only their relationship to all those violations, but ours. In other words, we somehow will make a meaning to the history of meaningless abuse, neglect, and torture that we've been through, so that we at once, through magic, remake the history of our relationship with that person and somehow bridge the chasm between the enslaved non-relationship and this life of identity and self-experience and self-respect and dignity that we have begun to experience, so that we can relate our parents or our lover or our tyrannizing spouse to this experience. The sadness at facing of the loss and the meaninglessness will then be denied, avoided, averted, so that the energies involved in that kind of drama are incredible on both sides. On the side of the slave that is about to be emancipating, often through their, which we talked about in the second lecture, when we talked about the return to desperation at the end, going back home, through the focusing of energies and values and the beginning power of their identity on that, and the power of the experience of hurt and rage that the slave is feeling, you can get situations where that power is equal to and in moments beyond the power of the bitterness of the slave owner. And in the magic of moments, you can get glimmerings of recognition in parents that have always treated you badly. You can make indeed magical situations where it appears that Lazarus is raised from the dead. By the sheer power of the confrontation. And it's strictly a phenomena of energy. For as soon as you turn the searchlight of your consciousness and hurt and rage off of the encounter, the slave owner slips back to the attitudes towards you that they had before, as if nothing happened. Because what happened was, in fact, a magical experience and not a related encounter. It's not the beginning of a new relationship as you fantasize, but rather an experience born of incredible ambivalence. In alchemy, that process is described as the capacity of the philosopher's stone, of this substance that has been made, as we've described this quarter, through incredible years of suffering and struggle and intent and truth-seeking and love. To take the fruit of that and put that next to a substance that has not been through that process, and to be able to transmute, namely change that substance directly, simply by proximity to power, into the holy substance, or being able to take lead and put the philosopher's stone, the gold, the elixir next to it, and directly turn it into gold simply by being near it. That's the energy phenomena. And one wonders whether the eternal fascinations with that, with the possibility of that, do not in fact come from a whole tradition of alchemists who were looking, in addition to their spiritual search, for some way to, through the transformation of themselves, to change the world that had tortured them into the need of consciousness, into a recognition of their beauty or value, without sorrowfully recognizing that the only gold worth being around is the gold that has gotten there in its own tortured, holy, searching way. Why must we, in love and in our search, always be looking for those qualities of nature and personality that can magically heal other people? Why do we want that? Why is that the measure? Why are we not respectful of the experience of that itself and the complementary experience of being near persons who have paid that price themselves? Why must we change the world? Why must we get people to understand? Why do we need acceptance? Incidentally, this desire to change our parents in a moment so as to symbolically make our history meaningful is often experienced through the desire to make the stranger accept us and understand us. And you can find people who are very strong in their experience of identity when they're by themselves, or even when they're with the people that they love, who have a beginning confidence in themselves, sense of ability, sense of talent, sense of value, and yet whose lives are still haunted by the need for recognition in the stranger's eye. And it's, I want to be accepted, my anxieties about that. Will I be approved of? And we often find that very difficult to understand, even those persons who are feeling that. How can I still want those people that I know aren't as bright as I am, don't feel what I feel, aren't paying dues? I know they're superficial, I don't approve of their values, and yet I still want them to see me. Why is that so strong? Why can't it even wash out my experience of myself when I'm with them and reduce me to what I felt in elementary school and junior high school? A basket case of anxieties trying to figure out what to say next. Why is that so strong? And sometimes it is indeed that we have never felt any sense of self-value, and in the mystery of the layers of healing, when we have our hands on some kind of a sense of value, we need to return back through the layers of fixation and the layers of developmental experience and cure and heal those places that we pass through with injuries and neglect and that are vacuums, and it's that simple. We need to go back to junior high school and pass back through it again to know that we're all right, so that we rebuild all of those parts of ourselves where there are gaps or holes. However, in addition to that, sometimes the stranger is but the front, the mask, the persona for the slave owners that stand behind the stranger. And somehow, if we can get the uncaring, and sometimes this is tied up with chauvinism, chauvinistic, racist, uncaring, unloving, superficial stranger to see our value, maybe then, in that moment, our life has been worth it. Namely, there is that transformation of our history of hurt at the hands of the stranger. If we can get one of them to see our value, perhaps all of them could have do. And then we can go on from there feeling mellower, more charitable about the stranger. And we can tell ourselves things like, how can you expect people to recognize me when I didn't have my own value, but when I came to have my own value, then I got some recognition, so people simply treat you as you demand to be treated. Therefore, i.e., people ain't so bad as I was beginning to think they are. And the hurt that I had to face and what it implied something that I deal with. Have to deal with. I still have some relation to the stranger then. I don't have to feel my existential aloneness. I don't have to feel my isolation. I don't have to feel the isolation of consciousness and difference. There are a lot of things I don't have to deal with if I believe that the checker in the supermarket is a nice person if I demand it. So that these times, because of the focus of energies, are fraught with dramatic, symbolic experiences. And the logic of it is that way. We say things to ourselves like, I need to feel I can do it once, or I need to have this thing happen once. And the notion is that if once we can have a different experience than we've ever had, we say to ourselves, then we are a different person. But the hidden logic is all those other people are different from what I thought they were. However, those third and fourth and fifth honeymoons lose their momentum. We watch things go back to what they were. We don't feel any differently after we've done those things. And we find ourselves back again with the hurt and disappointment. And at some place, usually, as I said before, after the rage, we find ourselves faced with walking away sad. Some people handle it by shining on and leaving some vestige of role-playing with the slave owners. Some handle it by never talking to those people again and enforcing that in different ways, moving away, changing names, unlisting phones, changing addresses so that people can't find you, disappearances, psychological and spiritual disappearances, so that no one would know you because the identity that you have been nourishing bursts out into a public stance before the slave owners. I don't know who you are anymore. But in one way or another, one comes to a place where you no longer relate to in any meaningful attempt to deal with the bitterness and hurt and the obligation of the slave owners. And then it is time for the apocalypse. When the slave owners have no reason to moderate their rage anymore, when there is no reason to confine it to fits where it breaks out and the poisonous tongue or the evil eye cuts you down in a glance, in a comment, in a sarcasm, in a taking of you lightly, in a lecture to you, then it's time for heavy warfare. The whole concept of vendetta. Not the impulsive breakdown of the control of sadism, but sadism as a committed experience. For now, you as the betrayer, the one who made their life worthwhile, or at least compensated for their not wanting to live, have in the cruelty of your rejection of them brought them into a new level of experiencing hurt, added to it with the hurt of your rejection of them when you know how hurt and how unjustly they've been treated. But on top of it, because this is and always has been a non-relationship, in your betrayal, they are capable of reinterpreting all the things that you have ever done out of love, guilt, kindness, humanity, to try to assuage their hurt and bitterness. They can cancel the humanity and care and warmth and love of all of those and turn them in the fiat of betrayal into the opposite. Namely, they are all transformed into hurts, so that they can say in good faith, I don't believe anything you ever did for me. I don't feel it. I'm hurt by it because I was vulnerable and believed it, and now you're betraying it. All of those things were lies or abuses of me. I don't see how you could have done it. I'm speechless at it. And that, again, generates the logic for further denial of your rights. You never had any rights with the slave owner anyway, but now, as the betrayer, you are even more down to that person. And on top of it, you are now going off to a world where you're going to offer your vulnerability to other people, and they can take it free, and you have no right to offer it because you are indebted to them. And those people will respond to it freely. Namely, there is a possibility of you having meaningful, loving experiences when you've left them bleeding. Therefore, I have a right to violate that vulnerability with sadistic actions and tortures because you have no right to have the experiences you're about ready to have. And
I have a right to turn anyone who's about ready to have those experiences with you against you. From whence comes vicious phone calls to the new people in one's life, the therapists who get calls from parents of patients and spouses of patients who say things like, I don't want you to tell him or her that I called, but I want to tell you one thing. There's something you don't know about him or her. And lies are told, distortions are told, sadistic comments are told as a way of destroying any possibility of relationship, because no one has the right to experience beauty when they have been violated as they have. Children are violated out of the feeling of that, the justification of the use of children in divorces and destroying relationships are rationalized on those kinds of grounds, that a spouse who leaves a slave owner has no right to have loving experiences with her or his children after that. And anything is justified to destroy that possibility if I can't have that. And it's not doing anything unfair. It's simply truthful. And vendettas have again all of that minded, spirited action to them that extreme power. Life now of the liberated slave becomes one in which he or she has broken through to freedom as an experience in the beginning, and then in time as a relatively consistent state of being. Namely, it's beyond a feeling. It's a place in which you live, where now the emotional processes of your life are not based on your idea of life, not on your concept of your obligations, but in truth, emergent experiences based on whim and feeling and choice. But in which you feel from time to time, because you have, in all likelihood, in the context of the processes we're talking about in this course, not only come to freedom, but to living vulnerably. From time to time, you will get experiences of vindictiveness and sadism that will touch you to the heart of you, and the only way that they won't is if you withdraw and close yourself off, in which case you buy protection in exchange for the loss of vulnerability. So that the dilemma that you're in, you cannot remove vulnerability in areas of your life and stay vulnerable in other areas without fragmenting yourself in schizoid, spaced out ways that you pay for in other ways. And this process that we've been talking about here tends to move towards organic vulnerability, so that the ability to be totally open in certain areas and unavailable in other areas of experience is militated against just by virtue of the nature of the process of growth, which tends to make us vulnerable across the way. So it means that you are vulnerable to being hit below the belt, broadsided, knifed in the back, hurt when you least expect it, hurt when you're not looking for it, and with hurts that have all of the cleverness and viciousness of the instinctual negative logic of sadists who, for whom you are now the demonic focus of their hating of their life. They know where to hit you, and they tend to hit in the places that hurt the most. And contrary to the logic of more superficial Pollyanna concepts of growth, it never hurts less. What happens over the years as your freedom and identity gain a momentum is that those hurts, while going to the heart of you, you can recover faster, react more effectively in restraining sadism and pushing it back. You get smarter about preserving the walls that stand between you and the occasions for sadistic intervention in your life and manipulation. You get smart about the strategies of evil. You can get to a place where the hurts don't make you defensive in your living, but you're able to sustain an aggressive attitude toward your life in spite of a life of punctuated hurts. But you still get hurt to the bottom on schedule for the rest of your life. And it doesn't stop when people die. Those people who have felt sorry for and pitied the slave owners that have been dealt into the logic of the revenge and the vendetta are very happy after the grave, and incidentally sometimes legal professions and professional people are parties to the maintenance of those vendettas through the thin cover of legal arrangements and whatnot. The reminder of those hurts and violations go on always. There's always somebody that'll come out of the woodwork, write you a letter, run across you in a supermarket or at a movie theater that will look at you with hate for what you did to. Your ex-husband, your ex-wife, your mother, your father, your aunt, your friend, whoever it was. There's somebody who is an ally in the hatred, and the possibility is there. So that even the grave is not a resting place for that. Now, the existential dilemma, or the value choice that you're confronted with in choosing the final step of revolving this slavery and breaking loose the rage, you face that there was nothing which gives them the justification to hate you every day, all night, forever, whether they're thinking about you or not. What you buy in that choice is the possibility of freedom. And you're not buying less conflict. You're buying more conflict. You're buying more pain, and you're buying viciousness in exchange for controlled rage with leaks. And if you are a person who values freedom, if you're a person who's capable of bringing a lot of resources to freedom that allow freedom as in its mercurial aspect to conjure the most amazing, deep, wide-range, artistic, loving, spirited human experiences. And freedom is an essential ingredient of the highest of human experiences. If you're a person that brings a lot of resources to that, so that freedom is not only in itself as an idea, in essence, important to you, but also you can make for experiences that can make life worthwhile in spite of your facing that whole chunks of it or all of it up to this point have been a waste, and people are going to hate you the rest of your life and try to tear you down. If you bring a lot to that and value freedom in the weighing of demanding absolute freedom, you will probably come to a place where you choose it. If you've not known freedom, if you don't value it a lot, and if you sense that the experiences that you will have in it will not justify it, you may falter at that place and settle for a double life of some identity, some good experiences, and a trade-off of some gesture to keep the rage under control because it doesn't feel worth it to you. And again, no one can say whether any other person should make that choice.